Good evening. You've been invited, ignited 10 times now. I'm getting a little hot. I don't know how it is about you, but we're due for a 5-minute break again after my 5 minutes. I'm chairing this session alone, but co-organized it with Tony Nyong of the African Development Bank, who sent us two fantastic colleagues of his to join me running the session on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, room 141. So write that down right now. Climate is, of course, one of those issues where the past 10 years we've gotten lots more certainty that we're indeed dealing with a serious issue, an issue that's already happening, that's going to continue regardless of what global agreements decide or don't decide about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But that certainty comes with increasing uncertainty about what we're actually facing in the real world. Is that one flood or that one drought due to climate change? Should we be expecting more droughts or floods in particular places? Now, last year, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, launched a report, the Special Report on Extremes, that tells us the scientific consensus on just those issues, plus the issue of how to use that information to better manage risk. Now, the IPCC brings together the world's best scientists from the climate side normally, but in this case including people from the disaster risk management world, several of them in the room here today, to summarize the best knowledge, which is then, in terms of its summary for policymakers, approved by consensus by world governments. So it's something that's really the basis for future international policy. And in this report, they took what we know from the science side, and we'll give you all the insights in this session, and looked at what it means for risk at international, national, and local levels. We'll present you all those insights and give you a perspective of this new way of looking at risk from the climate side, which is quite normal for many of you, which is to acknowledge that weather and climate events, of course, are not the risk. They're just a small portion, and it's actually about the exposure and vulnerability, like was said many times before today, but is not often acknowledged in the climate world. So we've got a bridge here between those two communities, including the realization that much of this risk can be avoided much more effectively by investing in anticipation and resilience rather than just responding after the fact, even though we need to acknowledge that we may need to do more of that as well. From that report, we'll go to several practical examples, and I'm delighted to have Sophia Bettencourt in our panel, who's worked on these issues, including that bridge between climate and disaster risk management for 15 years, including in the Pacific, where she wrote or she led this policy note, which focused on 3 themes that I think will be running through our session as well. When we're talking about assessing risk, we're really talking about informing decision-making. So it's also about communication. And it's about the sort of tools we need to do that effectively. So it's about instruments of different kinds. It's also about institutions. I've mentioned many times that some of these messages are very new to the climate world. There's also many messages that are new to the disaster risk reduction world. And both of those worlds often fail to connect to regular sectoral planning. How do we get that institutional structure right? And most importantly, that deals with incentives. Currently, the incentives are often stacked against risk reduction, against adaptation to climate change. How can we start bringing some of those elements together? Sophia will share her lessons from the Pacific, as well as more recently from Africa, where she's leading the PPCR in several African countries. Our World Bank colleagues, Balgis is a coordinating lead author, actually, of the IPCC SREX report, and will join me for that. But Alexis will be joining me for the safeguards story, where the African Development Bank is actually systematically screening all its investments now for changing climate risks, including disaster risks. We'll also have several other practitioners who will be sharing their experiences on using this information, putting it to use in practice. The Kenya Red Cross, James Kisia, will be on stage. And we'll be sharing some of his challenges in the field, just like the development banks are doing it at national scale and the global community is struggling with it at global scale. What we'd like to have in terms of climate information is this crystal ball that tells us what's going to happen the next few years, the next 10 years, the next century. And what we get from the IPCC is this. This is the best effort in the summary for policymakers. And governments complain. We cannot understand this. This is not something we can give to our ministers. Yet it's the best we have. How do we bridge that gap? What people actually see in practice when they get the best climate information given to them currently is often something like this. That's at least misleading, possibly even constructed to be misleading in the eyes of some. How do we deal with that? One of the challenges clearly relates to communication. And one of the things my institution, the Red Cross Our Crescent Climate Center, has been investing in is the use of games. We'll be discussing that briefly in this session, but I also want to make an additional advertisement. Besides the Wednesday morning 9 a.m. that you should have in your calendars by now, Wednesday lunch, 1 o'clock, right here at this stage, in this room, we're inviting you to play a serious game on climate risk management. Part of that set of communication tools that may help get us across some of these barriers. Thank you very much. Once again, Wednesday at 9 and Wednesday at 1 right here. Wednesday at 9 is in room 141. Thank you very much.